A few days ago, I showed you a small army of very smart people try to change Bitcoin and fail. The forks, the civil war, the miners signaling under 1%. The takeaway was simple. Nobody can change the rules of Bitcoin. Not developers, not miners, not billionaires. And a lot of you wrote back with the exact right next question. If they can't change it, can they still get to mine? So this weekend I went and read how the thing most of you actually own your Bitcoin through, the Bitcoin ETF, really works. Line by line. The custody agreements. The fine print nobody reads. And here's what I found. While everyone was arguing about whether the code could be changed, one Wall Street firm quietly bought more than 800,000 Bitcoin, about 2.7% of every coin that will ever exist. And more than 80% of all the Bitcoin sitting inside these Wall Street funds is locked inside a single company's vault. They couldn't change Bitcoin, so they did the next best thing. They bought the door to it. And there's one sentence buried in how these funds work that decides whether you actually own Bitcoin or just a promise of it. By the end of this, you'll know which one you're holding and the one move that keeps you an owner instead of a renter. Now, let me say the calming part first because I'm not here to scare you out of anything. If your Bitcoin is in an ETF, it has not been stolen, and I'm not telling you to sell it. ETFs are useful, and the price exposure is real. This isn't a panic video. But there's a difference between owning Bitcoin and owning a piece of paper that tracks Bitcoin. And that difference is the entire reason this asset was invented. It's the difference between a thing nobody can freeze and a thing that sits behind three middlemen who can. I'm going to show you exactly where that line is and which side of it you're standing on right now. There are no certainties here, only probabilities. And anyone telling you Wall Street captured Bitcoin is selling you fear. What actually happened is quieter and more useful to understand. I'm Tim. This is Tim Talks Finance, where we take the scary headline and follow it all the way down to what it means for your money. Let's get into it. Let's start with what actually happened, because the turnaround is almost hard to believe. For years, Wall Street's biggest names didn't just doubt Bitcoin, they attacked it. The CEO of the largest asset manager on earth, BlackRock, once called it an index of money laundering. The head of America's biggest bank called it a fraud and said he'd fire anyone on his trading desk caught touching it. The message was loud and constant. It's a scam. It's for criminals. Stay away. Banks wouldn't go near it. And the whole pitch of Bitcoin from day one was that you didn't need them. No bank, no broker, no permission. Just you and your keys. Then, in 2024, the same Wall Street opened the spot Bitcoin ETF, and the money didn't trickle in, it flooded. BlackRock's fund became one of the fastest growing ETFs in the history of the entire industry, pulling in tens of billions of dollars, faster than almost anything that had ever launched. The people who'd spent a decade calling it a fraud had discovered it was the best product they'd ever sold. That one BlackRock fund now holds more than 800,000 Bitcoin. 2.7% of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist inside a single product at a single firm. More than 2,000 institutions now hold Bitcoin this way. Pensions, endowments, the kind of money that moves markets. And I want you to sit in the strangeness of that for a second, because it's the whole reason this video exists. The asset that was designed specifically, deliberately, to get you out from under the banks is now one of the bank's favorite products. The escape hatch became the thing you buy from the people you were escaping. Now, is that a disaster? No. Here's the honest, calm truth. And then here's the part that matters. The honest truth. Those ETFs are backed by real Bitcoin. It's not fake. When you buy a share, the fund really does go buy the coins. For a lot of people, especially inside a retirement account where you can't easily hold the real thing, that access is genuinely valuable. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But here's the part that matters, and it's the thing almost nobody explains when they're selling you the ETF. When you buy that share, you are not buying Bitcoin. You are buying a claim on Bitcoin that somebody else is holding for you. And the whole magic of Bitcoin, the property you were actually paying for, lives in that one word, holding. Who holds it? Because in my last video, the reason nobody could change Bitcoin came down to who ran the network. This time, the reason it matters comes down to who holds the keys. And the answer, for most people watching this, is going to surprise you. Quick heads up before we go in, because this is the part that actually matters. The next few minutes are where you find out whether the Bitcoin you think you own is really yours. It's the most important stretch of this video, and I'll keep it in plain English, no jargon, I promise. Stay with me. So let's do the thing the ETF brochures never do. Let's follow your money, step by step, from your account to the actual coin. Because there are more hands in that chain than you think. Step 1. You open your brokerage app and buy a share of the ETF. You now own a share. That share is a promise from the fund company. Step 2. The fund company takes your money and buys Bitcoin. But it doesn't hold that Bitcoin itself. It hands it to a custodian. A custodian is just a company whose job is to hold the keys and keep the coins safe. Step 3. The custodian holds the private keys. And this is the sentence I promised you at the start, so let it land. Whoever holds the private keys controls the Bitcoin. Not whoever's name is on the account, not whoever bought the share, whoever holds the keys. You, the person who put up the money, never touch a key. You cannot withdraw a single Satoshi to your own wallet. Try it. Call your broker and ask them to send your Bitcoin to a wallet you control. They can't. That's not a bug in the product, it's what the product is. You own a share that tracks the price. You do not own the coin. Now, on its own, that might be fine. It's how most people own gold. They buy a gold fund, they never see a bar, they trust that somewhere in a vault the metal exists. For gold, that trade is old and mostly works. But here's what makes Bitcoin different, and it's the reason it was invented. Bitcoin was the first asset in history you could truly hold yourself, digitally, with no vault, no guard, and no one's permission. Choosing the paper claim on the one asset ever built to end paper claims is a choice worth making with your eyes open. But here's where it gets serious for Bitcoin specifically, and it's the number that should be on the screen behind me for the rest of your life. We're about halfway in, and this is the hinge of the whole video, so stay with me. Everything up to here was the what. This, right now, is the why it matters. More than 80% of all the Bitcoin held by every one of these American ETFs sits with the same custodian, one company. $77 billion of Bitcoin, the reporting says, concentrated in a single point. Forbes didn't call that a convenience. They called it a choke point. Think about what that word means. The entire reason Bitcoin exists, the reason it's worth talking about at all, is that it removed the single point of control. No central vault, no one office that can be robbed, hacked, subpoenaed, or ordered to freeze an account. Its security comes from being spread across tens of thousands of independent machines that nobody controls. And the ETF quietly undoes that. It takes an asset whose superpower is having no choke point and pours 80% of it into one. I'm not saying that custodian is going to fail. It's large, it's regulated, it's careful. The point isn't a prediction, the point is the shape of it. You bought Bitcoin to escape the world where one company holding everything is a risk you have to trust your way around. And the most popular way people are buying it rebuilds exactly that world. Let me make it concrete with the question that actually decides this. What happens if something goes wrong? Not likely, but possible. If you hold your own Bitcoin in your own wallet with your own keys, nothing that happens to a bank, a broker, or a custodian can touch it. Their problem is not your problem. That's the entire product. But if you hold a share, you are standing in line behind that custodian, behind that fund, behind your broker. If the custodian has a bad day, if the sponsor fails, if a court freezes the fund while lawyers argue for 2 years, your coins are not your coins you can just go grab. You're a creditor with a claim, waiting to find out what your claim is worth. And you don't have to imagine that failing. Bitcoin's short history is a graveyard of people who thought they owned Bitcoin and actually owned a claim. Mt. Gox, the biggest exchange of its day, collapsed with something like 850,000 coins. Its customers became creditors overnight. A Canadian exchange called Quadriga CX locked up when its founder died, and the keys apparently died with him. Around $190 million. Frozen, because whoever holds the keys holds the coins. In 2022, Celsius, Voyager, and then FTX took in billions from ordinary people who believed their crypto was theirs and found out in bankruptcy court that they were unsecured creditors standing in line. Now, I'll be fair. A regulated American ETF with an audited cold storage custodian is a far safer animal than FTX ever was. That's true. But every one of those disasters had the same shape as a share. You held a claim, someone else held the coins, and when that someone else failed, the distance between those two things became the most expensive lesson of those people's lives. The ETF is a safer version of that shape. It is still that shape. That is the counterparty, the middleman. The exact thing Satoshi spent the first paragraph of the Bitcoin white paper trying to delete. The ETF is convenient precisely because it puts the middlemen back. And the middlemen are convenient right up until the day they aren't. So the fork couldn't touch your Bitcoin because no one controls the network. But a share in a fund? That has an owner of the keys, an issuer, and a committee. Every single thing Bitcoin was built to remove. Which brings us to the real question. If that's the trade, why is everyone making it? And where does this actually go? Here's the reveal, and it's not a conspiracy. Wall Street didn't capture Bitcoin. They can't. Remember what the fork just proved. They can't change one line of the rules. They can't print one extra coin. They can't move the 21 million cap by a single Satoshi. All the Bitcoin they hold plays by the same rules as the Bitcoin in your wallet. On that level, Bitcoin won. The most powerful financial institutions on Earth looked at the hardest money ever made and decided the only move was to buy it. That's not defeat. That's the thesis coming true. And be clear about why they want it in. BlackRock doesn't hold 800,000 Bitcoin because they fell in love with hard money. They hold it because they charge a fee on every one of those coins, every year, forever. Your conviction about Bitcoin just became their permanent revenue stream. That's not sinister, it's just what they are. But it tells you who the product is really built for. And it's worth remembering when those same firms start telling you the ETF is the only sensible way to own Bitcoin. Of course they say that. The ETF is the version of Bitcoin that pays them. But watch what they did next, because it's clever and it's the whole game. They couldn't change the money, so they changed how you hold it. They took the one asset you can truly own with no counterparty and wrapped it back inside the system with all the counterparties. Same coin, completely different ownership. And that difference shows up exactly when it counts. A share can be halted, the market closes nights, weekends, and holidays, and trading can be stopped in a crisis, which is precisely the moment you might want out. A fund can gate its redemptions. A court can freeze the wrapper while lawyers argue for 2 years. None of that can happen to a coin sitting in your own wallet. It settles in minutes, at 3 in the morning, on Christmas Day, no matter what any exchange or bank or government is doing. The coin doesn't take holidays, and it doesn't take orders. And now the rules for that wrapper are being written in Washington as we speak. There's a bill moving through Congress right now, the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act, that will set who's allowed to custody your Bitcoin, what those custodians must do, and how tightly the whole thing is supervised. Whatever your politics, understand what it means. The terms of the door are being set. And a door whose terms can be set by a committee is, by definition, a door that can be closed. Now compare that, really compare it, to the coin sitting in a wallet you control. Nobody writes rules for that coin. There's no committee that supervises your seed phrase. There's no custodian who can have a bad quarter with it. It doesn't know who you are. It can't be told to say no to you. And, as we watched all last month, it can't be changed even when insiders beg. It is the one financial asset on Earth with no phone number to call and no lever to pull. That's not a slogan. That is the literal, mechanical difference between the two things on your screen. One has an off switch that belongs to someone else. The other doesn't. And this is where the story rhymes with everything we cover on this channel. In 1971, one man changed what the dollar was, on a Sunday night, with one signature, because the dollar has an issuer, and an issuer has a lever. Every dollar in your account works because a chain of counterparties, a bank, a processor, a central bank, agrees to let it. And every counterparty is a point where someone can say no. We've watched them say no. To truckers in Canada, whose accounts were frozen in 2022 with no court order and no conviction, just a name on a list. To a sitting British politician quietly debanked until the public outcry forced it into the light. To entire legal American industries cut off from the banking system through a program critics named Operation Choke Point. No law broken, just access switched off. Every one of those was a counterparty deciding who's allowed to use their own money. Bitcoin's entire design was the deletion of that no. And the ETF, for all its convenience, sells the no right back to you with a bow on it. That's not evil, it's just important. You should know exactly what you traded away for the convenience. Quick, practical note, because this is the exact machine we're talking about. I keep a free page called the Macro Command Center. It puts the 6 numbers that actually decide the value of your money on one screen. Real inflation, the money supply, what the Treasury's issuing, the interest on the debt. It's the same board I read every morning. Free, no credit card, links in the description. Because the whole point of this channel is that you shouldn't take my word for any of it. You should watch it with your own eyes. So the network can't be changed, and your self-custodied coins can't be touched. Then the only question left is the practical one. What do you actually do with all this? And here's where I have to be careful, because this is where people either protect themselves or get robbed doing it. So what do? Let me be clear about what I am not saying first. I am not telling you to sell your ETF. For money inside a 401k or an IRA, the ETF might be the only way you can hold Bitcoin at all, and access beats no access. If that's you, this isn't a mistake. It's a starting point. And let me be even-handed here, because I'd rather you make a clear-eyed choice than a fearful one. There are real people for whom the ETF is the right answer, full stop. If the only Bitcoin you can hold is inside a tax-advantaged retirement account, the ETF is how you get exposure at all, and that beats sitting on the sidelines. If you know, honestly, that you'd lose a hardware wallet or forget where you hid the paper, then a regulated custodian holding the keys is protecting you from your own worst afternoon. And if you only ever want to track the price and never actually use Bitcoin as money, the wrapper is simpler. None of those people are wrong. The mistake isn't owning the ETF. The mistake is owning it without knowing you traded away the one property, true ownership, that made Bitcoin worth buying in the first place. Know the trade, then choose it on purpose. What I'm telling you is simpler, and it's the one move that changes everything. Know the difference, and make sure at least part of your Bitcoin is held the way Bitcoin was meant to be held, by you. That means a core position in self-custody, your own wallet, your own keys, coins that no custodian holds, no committee supervises, and no bad quarter can freeze. You don't have to move everything. You just have to stop being 100% a renter on the one asset whose entire value is ownership. And it's more approachable than the jargon makes it sound. You don't need to be technical. A hardware wallet, a little device about the size of a USB stick, costs less than a nice dinner, and it does exactly one job. It keeps your keys off the internet and in your hand. You start small. Move a tiny amount first, $20, and watch it arrive, so you trust the process before it ever holds real weight. You write your recovery words on paper, never on a screen, never in a photo, never in the cloud. And you put that paper somewhere only you know. That's the whole skill. It's closer to using a safe than using a computer. And if you're doing this for retirement, That matters twice over. A sealed phrase your family can actually inherit is a cleaner thing to pass down than a brokerage login tangled in probate. But here is the trap, and it's the exact same trap as last time, so I'm going to keep saying it until every person watching is immune to it. The moment you start moving Bitcoin into self-custody, the scammers appear. You'll see slick videos and pop-ups offering to help you set up your wallet, asking you to type your seed phrase, your private keys, into a website to import or verify your coins. The instant you type your seed phrase into anything online, your Bitcoin is gone. A real wallet never asks for it online. Ever. Self-custody done wrong loses more people their coins than any custodian ever will. So if you take one thing from this video, take that sentence. When in doubt, go slow, and never type your keys into a screen. Now that sentence I promised you at the very start, the one that decides whether you own Bitcoin or just a promise. Here it is. You cannot withdraw the Bitcoin. In the fine print of every one of these funds, in plain language, is the fact that you, the retail shareholder, can never take delivery of the actual coin. You own the price. You do not own the asset. And once you've read that sentence, you can never unknow which one you're holding. So here's how to watch this play out like an adult, instead of panicking at headlines. 3 signals. Signal 1, the custody concentration. Watch whether that 80+% sitting in one custodian goes up or down. The more it concentrates, the more Bitcoin's superpower, no choke point, gets quietly rebuilt into a choke point. Signal 2, the Clarity Act. Watch what it says about who can hold your Bitcoin and under what conditions. That's the terms of the door being written in real time. Signal 3, redemption access. Watch whether any of these funds ever let ordinary holders take actual delivery of their coins. The day they do, the wrapper gets a lot safer. Until then, a share is a claim, not a coin. Watch those 3, and you'll understand this better than 90% of the people who bought the ETF and never read a word of how it works. And notice where all 3 point. Every one of them leads back to the same fact from last time. Bitcoin's whole value is that no one can control it. So the only question that has ever mattered is whether you're holding it in a way where that's actually true. The fork couldn't touch your Bitcoin because the network has no owner. Wall Street's door only touches your Bitcoin if you leave it on the other side of that door. 21 million, fixed, forever. But yours only if you hold it. This isn't me telling you to buy anything or sell anything. There are no certainties here, only probabilities. Bitcoin is volatile. It has fallen 50% before and it will again. And none of that is the point. The point is the property. In a world where a committee can change your dollar on a Sunday night and a custodian can hold 80% of everyone's coins, holding one thing that answers to no one, that's not a trade. That's the whole reason it exists. I'll hand you the door. You decide which side of it to stand on. So, did Wall Street change Bitcoin? No. They couldn't move one Satoshi, and the fork just proved it in public. Did they find another way in? Yes. Not through the code, through the custody. They bought the door, and 80% of that door has a single lock. That's the takeaway I want to leave you with. Last time, the lesson was that no one can change Bitcoin. This time, the lesson is that it only matters if you actually hold it. The most powerful money ever made is still only as sovereign as the way you choose to own it. The 6 numbers I'd watch to see the dollar being changed under you. Inflation, the money supply, the debt, the rest. They're all free on the Macro Command Center. Links in the description. It takes 2 minutes. Next week, I'm breaking down the Fed's decision and what the new chair just did to your savings. And there's a number in it that changes the whole picture.